No one knew his name. Not the guards. Not the clerk. Not the man who passed him coffee outside the courtroom. He was just that homeless man. He sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom 4C, arms wrapped around a worn coat. His beard was long, his eyes quiet. His shoes didn't match. One brown, one black. People walked past him quickly, pretending not to look, but he saw them. He saw everything. It was a cold Wednesday morning in a city courthouse. The halls echoed with footsteps, slamming doors, and the buzz of old lights overhead. Lawyers moved, like they were racing time. People grumbled about traffic. Phones rang behind the clerk's desk. And there he sat, invisible to most. Until a sharp voice rang out from a young attorney nearby. "Sir," the lawyer said loudly, "you can't loiter here." The homeless man looked up. "I'm waiting," he said simply. "For what, your ride from the alley?" Another young man in a suit muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. People nearby laughed. Even the bailiff smirked. The man didn't argue. He just lowered his head and stayed seated. A security guard walked over. "Move along, sir. You're making folks uncomfortable." Still, he stayed. "I have business inside that courtroom," he said softly. More laughter. "Business? In courtroom 4C?" The young lawyer chuckled. "Sir, they're not giving out soup in there." The man just stared forward. 10 a.m. sharp. The courtroom doors opened. "Next case," the clerk called out. The crowd shuffled in. Lawyers, families, reporters, all filling the pews. The homeless man stood slowly, picked up a small folder wrapped in twine, and walked in after them. People stared as he entered. Is he really walking in? Doesn't he know where he is? Security's gonna grab him. But no one stopped him. Not yet. A lawyer from across the room pointed. "He's not allowed in here," she hissed. "He's not appropriate." Even the judge at the bench looked confused. "Is there an issue?" The homeless man spoke for the first time, his voice low, but calm. "No issue, Your Honor. But before we begin, I have something important to say, and I think you'll want to hear it." The room shifted, the air tightened. Everyone looked to the judge. The judge narrowed her eyes. "And who exactly are you?" The man stepped forward, opened his folder, and slowly held up a small worn ID card. The clerk gasped. The card read, "Honorable Matthew Ezra King, retired Supreme Court Justice, State of New York." The courtroom fell silent. The security guard dropped his arms. The lawyers stopped whispering. Even the judge stood up slowly. One reporter whispered, "No way. That's him?" A court officer spoke quietly. "He wrote one of the most important civil rights rulings in state history." The judge cleared her throat. "Justice King, we had no idea." "I know," the old man said simply. "And that's the problem." He stepped forward slowly, not with pride, but with purpose. The sound of his footsteps, heavy and even, echoed across the courtroom floor. It was the only sound in the room. He didn't look angry. He didn't raise his voice. But his eyes, calm and full of history, locked on the faces of those who had mocked him only minutes ago. "I didn't come here today to judge anyone," he said softly. His voice was rough but steady, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. "I came here to watch, to listen, to see if this courtroom still remembers what justice feels like." His words hung in the air. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across the room. The bailiff who had ordered him to move, the clerk who giggled, the young lawyer who cracked jokes, and the guard who had whispered behind his back. He didn't call them out by name. He didn't need to. "You saw a man sitting alone," he said, "in a worn coat, with mismatched shoes, and a beard too long for comfort. And you decided I wasn't worth respect." Silence. He let that truth settle before he continued. "And what I saw is how easy it is to mock a man who looks like he has nothing." Someone in the gallery shifted in their seat. Another cleared their throat. No one met his eyes anymore. "I've lived long enough to know that appearances fade," he said. "But character, that sticks." He held up his ID again, not to brag, but to remind. "I once wore the robe of this state's highest court. I've spoken in rooms where every word was written down and remembered. I've stood beside presidents. I've defended those whose voices couldn't reach this far." He lowered his hand, and his gaze. "I may have lost my house. I may no longer wear that robe. but I never lost my dignity. He paused. Let the words rest in the room, like a quiet storm, and no one, he said, more firmly now, gets to take that from me. Heads lowered, shoulders sank, not from defeat, but from shame. Because in that moment, every person in that courtroom remembered something they had forgotten. Respect isn't earned by power. It's earned by presence. And this man's presence filled every corner of the room. No one laughed anymore. The jokes stopped. The whispers dried up. Even the air felt different, heavier, humbler. The bailiff who had once rolled his eyes now stood up straighter, hands folded in front of him. The clerk who had smiled at the jokes sat very still, lips pressed together. The young lawyer, the one who first spoke out against the homeless man, looked down at his notepad, ashamed, like a schoolboy caught cheating. And the judge slowly rose from her chair, adjusted her robe, and looked across the room at the man who now stood taller than any of them. She stepped down from the bench, a rare move in any courtroom, and walked toward him. When she reached him, she extended her hand. Justice King, she said quietly. You are welcome in this courtroom, not as a visitor, not as a guest, but as a teacher. Then she turned, motioned toward the bench, and said the words no one expected. Would you do me the honor of sitting beside me? A few gasps were heard, but no one objected. The old man looked at her hand, then back at the courtroom. He nodded once, gladly. He walked up the steps and sat beside her, not like a man claiming his throne, but like a man being recognized, finally, for who he truly was. And then it happened. From the back of the room, a man stood, quietly. No applause, just respect. Then a woman stood, then a third, and one by one, the room rose, not for a show, not to be seen, but because their hearts told them to. This wasn't about power, it was about dignity, something far too many had forgotten, until now. And in that moment, in that silence, with one man sitting beside the judge, in an old coat, and tired eyes, the courtroom didn't feel like a place of law. It felt like a place of truth. The case continued, but it didn't matter anymore. The real story had already been written. When Justice King stood to leave, the judge walked with him to the door. She shook his hand. Thank you, sir, she said, for reminding us why we're here. He nodded, then turned to the courtroom. Be careful how you treat people, he said. You never know who they used to be, or who they still are. And with that, the man in the mismatched shoes, the long coat, and the quiet eyes walked out, as the courtroom watched him like a giant leaving the room. He wasn't there to judge, but his presence judged them all. Sometimes the ones we overlook are the ones who once wrote the rules.